No, Isaac will be. It's his job. Oh, sorry. Get out of the light. Good afternoon. Good early evening, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mary from Blomenstein, whom I will tell you a bit about in a minute, and then she will introduce our speaker this evening. So Mary from Blomenstein is a graduate of Rhodes University and has a BA degree majoring in English and Fine Arts Studies and has a higher diploma in education. She also has a postgraduate diploma in museology from the University of Stellenbosch. Mary has specialized in restoring and curating historic houses and gardens, as well as in designing and initiating education programs. She's worked in Stellenbosch, Cape Town, and Bath in the United Kingdom. Currently, she is the curator of UCT's Works of Art collection and the Irma Stern Museum, and has a particular interest in botanical art. So please welcome Mary.
It's nothing like being strung up in front of an audience. I am a natural exhibitionist, as you can tell. Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Madi. And it now gives me enormous pleasure to be able to introduce Brother Richard Maidwell, who is our guest speaker tonight. Born in Zimbabwe and educated at Christian Brothers College, Bulawayo, he moved to South Africa and joined the Catholic Order of Redemptionists as a religious brother. Following final vows, he was sent to study iconography in Tilburg, the Netherlands, in 1990, during the time of perestroika, just as Russia was beginning to open up. So it was a very interesting place to be and observe the Russian church coming out from underground. Brother Richard has worked in Cape Town as well as in KwaZulu-Natal, where he was based in both Bergville and Maryvale. He is currently vicar to the Redemptorist community, vocationalist director, and postulate master, as well as working in the parish and being a member of the parish council. He has been involved for a number of years in prison ministry at Pollsmoor. He is representative on the Council of Redemptorists of Africa and Madagascar. In 2015, he was asked by the Order's General Council in Rome to execute an exact copy of the well-known icon of Our Blessed Mother of Perpetual Help, along with several other iconographers from various countries. These icons will travel to Rome and be blessed by Pope Francis to mark the 150th anniversary of the Order receiving the original 14th century icon. Later this year, he will be attending an iconography course in London during a holiday visit to family. Brother Richard's love and interest in icons, iconography, and their spirituality began in his early teens and continues to this day. We welcome Brother Richard. Thank you.
Go in my pocket. Oh, there we go. No, that's okay. What happened?
Just went off.
Don't know what happened there.
I don't the...
Oh, there we go. Well, good evening, everybody. I think I'm sorted out. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Well, hello. After a few little technological hiccups, I think we're on our way. My computer didn't like talking to this arrangement here, so thanks to we've worked it out. Again, welcome to this an expose on icons and iconography by an iconographer. I know somebody would say, "Are you an expert on icons?" And I have to admit that I have been writing icons for 30-odd years, but I don't think anyone is ever an expert. It's a deep part of my spirituality and my Christian journey, and it's always in process. One is always learning. One is going ever deeper into all that the icon means, its history, its spirituality, its theology, and what it means in the church as an instrument of evangelization, as mission, as an art piece, as an historical art piece, as a period, as art historians like to put iconography as a period in art history. But of course for the church it is much more than that. And it's over and above and beyond art history, so that it's still a dynamic force in the life of faith. The first picture I put on the board is, of course, what we've come to call icons in our modern world. So it's a word that is used and bandied around in the technological world, political world, populist world, etc. Icons of society. But of course, icon is the Greek for image, so it just means image. A photograph is an icon in Greece, a likeness. So once we establish that, we've got a good idea. But of course, in our modern world, these icons that we see on the screen are very much related to what we will discover about the religious icon. In fact, all human beings are icons of God, as we say in iconography. But the usual understanding when we speak of religious icons are generally these jeweled, mostly small, beautifully painted little images. These are what we find in antique shops, what collectors are generally after, when particularly with the Russian style of icon, with what they call an oklad, which covers the painting. And in some of them, of course, they're very valuable and they have diamonds and jewels, etc., depending on how famous a particular icon was. But this is what comes up in the popular imagination when we talk about icons. But of course, it's much broader and it's much wider than just Russia and Greece. The whole of the Eastern Mediterranean, Russia, and parts of Europe, Italy, where iconography is still used, even in the Roman Church, the Latin Church, as well as the Orthodox Church, and as well as Catholics of the Byzantine tradition. So we have an old Russian icon here, a modern Greek Pantocrator, a Coptic Egyptian contemporary icon, a Coptic 4th century wall painting, and two 16th century Greek icons. So this is just a little example of the diversity in iconography, but also, if we look carefully, a unity. We could all name them and label them icons, even though there are differences. And of course, they are not just historical pieces. They are still used. They are very much a part of the faith and life of the Church, of Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Byzantine Rite. As you can see, Putin of Russia presenting the Pope an old Russian icon on his visit to the Vatican. The canonization of a Ukrainian martyr, the devotional aspect of iconography, etc. So they're still very much alive and in use. And of course, the interior of a Byzantine church with the icons is an integral part of the architecture and the worship and the liturgy. So that's all still very much part of the Eastern Church. Icons are also jewels. The efkaphelion of the bishop, which he wears around his neck. Usually in the Latin Church it's a cross, but in the Greek and Russian churches it's this. These Byzantine pieces of jewelry are also considered icons. So an icon extends from a panel piece to a piece of jewelry, to a embroidery on a vestment, to a mosaic on a wall, on a dome. It's wide, very wide. But we will keep ourselves to mostly the panel paintings tonight. So an icon, what is an icon? What makes an icon? How do we identify an icon? So I have two pieces here. Where did I put my little notes? Which are both extremes, but of course one is a Byzantine icon and the other one is a Western painting by Velázquez from the 17th century. Both depicting the same event, but both very different in the way they go about it. The Velázquez has a focus on realism, drama, very dark background, showing the physical suffering of Christ on the cross. The Byzantine icon, in comparison, has a gold background. Christ is quite relaxed in a sense in comparison to the Velázquez. Of course, in this is included the Virgin Mary and St. John, which is always the case in an icon of the crucifixion. And round the border, we have various saints, with St. John the Baptist at the top, the Archangel Michael and Gabriel, and the Peter and Paul, and the various other church fathers. The icon is saying something a little more than the Velázquez. Velázquez is very beautiful. It's a powerful image. But the icon presents us with a different way of seeing the same event. And we'll go on and discover more of what that means. Again, a Rubens crucifixion and a Byzantine from Constantinople crucifixion. The gold background. If we had to sit in front of these two images for any length of time, we could come to an understanding, perhaps a deeper understanding of the suffering man there, Jesus. But with the icon, if we spent a little longer, there would be an element of stillness that we would encounter within ourselves. So the icon has an ability to confront us, to come out of itself. Now, icons are called windows into the divine, but the icon also has the ability to reach out to us. And the longer you spend with them, one can explain it, but one has to spend time with them in order for this to happen and to take place. Now here again, two extremes. A Russian icon quite abstract in many ways. Most of the icons we have seen are generally quite abstract. There's an element of abstractness which was wanting in the other paintings before that. This is a Russian icon from the 16th century. It's Our Lady of Vladimir, of which there are many, many, many copies, and of course the Raphael on the other side. The Raphael, again, the element of naturalism, trying to capture that element of the tenderness of a mother and child. It could be any mother and child that Raphael might have seen on the streets of Naples or Rome, wherever he was. The icon, again, that element of stop. There's something more here. Very abstract, very flat, but either they attract you or they repel you. And that's something about the icon which we will also look at further. Here again we've got Michael the Archangel, Raphael's Archangel, which is very dramatic, standing on Satan, and he's ready to spear him. Large open wings, he's just alighted on this creature. The icon, Russian, also 15th century, still, frontal, looks very primitive, but has a presence, a directness. The gaze of the angel is directed at you. So immediately there is a type of relationship which happens between you and the angel depicted. You're not looking at a scene, you're confronted with a person. So there's less action, but there is a presence. So it all began in the Mediterranean with the spread of Christianity from Jerusalem right out into the Pax Romana and all around this part of the Eastern Mediterranean, into Egypt, Italy, right as far as Spain, right into Syria and what is today Turkey, Constantinople. These areas, as we know, was a whole mix of cultures and peoples and languages and art and ideas. And Christianity moved out, picked up in these cultures what was relevant and how best they could express themselves in their own way, artistically particularly. The oldest examples of Christian art that we have are in Rome and the catacombs. Now, these were all pagan symbols, pagan themes, which Christians adopted and what we say baptized and used to express their own new religion. It's very it's interesting that the early catacomb paintings were all symbolic. They were in the catacombs, they were graveyards. People didn't need to express a whole lot of sophisticated ideas. Bury the person, place a symbol over the top with a Christian symbol, some kind of sign that they had used. The Good Shepherd was generally Orpheus, who was a pagan symbol, which fitted very well with a Christian idea. Another one was the peacock, which was a pagan symbol, but fitted very well with the whole Christian idea of paradise and Christ himself, the promise of the world to come. There we go. Christians at the time were mostly from the poorer races, so there wasn't a lot of money for art. And as we know, art requires money in order to be executed. to pay the artists. So these people had very simple art, as we see the catacombs themselves dug out of the tufa, the rock which hardens, and very often they were the wealthier Christians would have a little area, a niche to themselves, where some of the nicest, because they could afford a little more, early Christian paintings are from. And if you could afford a little carving, that was even better. So here we have Christ the Good Shepherd, and the figure which became the Christian symbol of prayer with the arms upraised, which was taken from the pagan world at the time. That's how people prayed. But this one particularly with the Chi-Rho symbol, Christos, Jesus Christos, and the symbol of the dove, which was sent out from the ark and was the promise of life, that God had now relented and there would be dry land. So that was the symbol of paradise, that God has redeemed us and that now the flood is over, in other words. Without going too much into that, in about the latter part of the 3rd century, we find in the catacomb art figures of Christ. Now, prior to that, there were no actual figures of Jesus. You sometimes had somebody dressed in a toga pointing with a stick at a man wrapped in winding sheets, the raising of Lazarus. That is about as far as it got. There was no direct image of the features of Jesus, or an attempt at it. But round about the 3rd century, we find this image appearing, the bearded, long hair, which we've come to know as being the image of Jesus. Also, what is interesting is that the Alpha and the Omega. So the church is spreading. There's new converts. Christianity is becoming very popular. But of course, so are the ideas of what it's all about. Who is this person, Jesus? The Gospels themselves are just being collated and written, scraps being brought together, put together. The central idea was that he is the beginning and he is the end. So the more sophisticated the Christian thought becomes, so the art follows and displays that, so that it becomes a type of gospel for those who cannot read, but it also becomes a type of dogmatic statement. This is who he is. And the halo, which is a symbol of his divinity. So here's a man, he's divine as well, he's the beginning and he's the end. So this image is starting to become as I said, a dogmatic statement. It's telling us about who Jesus is. Of course, the more sophisticated art of the Mediterranean world, as we know from, we've seen pictures and mosaics of Pompeii, beautiful images of people, beautiful paintings, particularly in Pompeii, frescoes, pagan frescoes. But the most beautiful portraits that have survived are from Egypt, because Egypt had been Hellenized for the past 300 years. And the Hellenized Egyptians used portraits on their mummies instead of the normal, like the Tutankhamun mask that we've come to know. So these very evocative, very deep portraits, executed in wax, what they call encaustic, were placed on the mummy, as you see in that one, with the mummy wrappings around. And because of that, in the dry air, most of them were found in a place called Natrun, which is not far from Cairo. And from these, we can see how the art of the time and the style was used to produce the ever-growing art of the icon. These are a sample of some of these portraits, Fayum portraits. And already you can see if you put a halo around them, they'd be an icon. But they're very expressive, very beautiful. There's a somberness. This little one, eyes are a little smiling, I think. But, sorry?
Are they Christian?
No, most of these were just pagan Roman, or Greek with Roman, because there was a mix of culture. But that looking out beyond death, the large eyes, the seriousness, there's no big smiles and teeth and things. There's just a portrait, gentle, but there's a presence. Now, of course, the early Christians, in wanting to express what they felt about the new faith and to express it visually, of course, we're at the right time and place in order to use this, to do so. Sorry, going back. There we go. This particular portrait of Christ dates from the 6th century, the late 6th century, and was found in Egypt. It's not found, it was in the monastery of St. Catherine's in the Sinai. And it's also encaustic. It's a hot wax method. Now, this you can see the direct relationship between the Fayum portraits and this one. And it is one of the oldest portraits of Christ in existence. It has been damaged at some stage. This side here, you can see the eyes a little bit off key, but the halo denoting the divinity, and the presence, again, that presence, that engagement with the onlooker, with the person who's looking at the portrait, so that there is a type of relationship that is established. And there's very little detail in the background. Of course, he's holding the gospel books, jeweled gospel books, and blessing with his right hand. This is also an encaustic painting from St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, around about the same time as the portrait of Christ. And it is of the Virgin Mary, with the Christ child seated on her lap. We've got St. George and St. Theodore. That was the other one. Both martyrs because they hold the cross. And of course, by this time, Christianity has become much more popular. It has been legalized, and it is starting to take on the expression and the symbolism and the trappings of the Byzantine court. So the Virgin Mary is dressed and seated as the Byzantine empress, in the same color too, the royal purple, although this is a variation of purple. And the two martyr saints are dressed as courtiers, although George was a Byzantine soldier. There we can see the Virgin Mary is looking slightly off to the side. The halo's there again. The very frontal hierarchic attitude of the portraits. And the one of St. Theodore, again related in the same category as the Fayum portraits, with that direct gaze. Now, I had to put this in because it's one of my things about the Shroud of Turin, although a lot of people say that the carbon-14 dating has put that in the box and it's no longer authentic, etc., etc. There's a huge school of thought which thinks otherwise, for lots of reasons. We won't go into that now. But the portrait of Christ that we saw, the one from St. Catherine's Monastery, and the Shroud of Christ fit extremely well with the St. Catherine's Christ. Now, within the Eastern Church and within the West, there is a legend, and we always know there's no fire without smoke, whatever, and that the There's a legend in the Eastern Church about King Ogbe of Edessa, which is in modern-day Turkey. But that was one of the first cities, I think it's Ufa it's called today. It was one of the first cities to accept Christianity. So there's some historical vein of truth running through. Now this king sent a delegation to Christ during his lifetime because he was suffering from leprosy, and he asked the king if he could be healed, if Christ would come and heal him. It is said that Jesus took a cloth and touched his face and said, "I'm sent to the children of the house of Israel. That's my concern." But he gave this to the servant who took it back, and the king was healed. Now, there was also a cloth. There's always been a legend of a cloth, the vernicle, which was put above the Chalke gate, one of the major gates into Constantinople, and it was the image of the city, which was said to protect it. We see here, there's King Ogbe, and he's receiving the cloth. This is a very old icon from St. Catherine's Monastery as well. And this young man, actually, the rest of the icon is not related to the story of Ogbe. This is just a little side panel. But that's Ogbe, and he was healed. A little bit of a close-up. Of course, there's a whole theme of the holy veil, the vernicle, which has existed from very early times right through to modern times, and we see this repeated and repeated in icons all over the place. There you see the actual vernicle itself, the holy face, and the icon is known as the icon akhyropoietes, the icon made without human hands. And of course, in the West, the legend takes a slightly different turn, and we have Saint Veronica, who wipes the face of Jesus on his way to the cross. Now, Veronica, the word Veronica, is a play on vera, ikon, the true likeness, the true image. So, from east or west, there's something about this cloth. And even in various places throughout the world, I know in Italy there's a cloth in St. Peter's which is said to be the cloth of Christ, etc. So there's something that kept going right from a very early time. Now we know that in history, the church historian Eusebius, he writes in the 3rd century, and I'm going to quote it properly. This is Eusebius's History of the Church, written in the 3rd century. And he says, "As I have mentioned, I do not think I ought to omit a story that deserves to be remembered by those who will follow us, the woman with a hemorrhage, who, as we learn from the Holy Gospels, was cured of her trouble by our Saviour, was stated to have come from here. Her house was pointed out in the city, and a wonderful memorial of the benefit the Saviour conferred upon her was still there. On a tall stone base at the gates of her house stood a bronze statue of a woman on one knee and resembling a suppliant with arms outstretched. Facing this was another of the same material, an upright figure of a man with a double cloak neatly draped over his shoulders, and his hand stretched out to the woman. Near his feet on the stone slab grew an exotic plant, which climbed up to the hem of the bronze cloak and served as a remedy for illnesses of every kind. This statue, which was said to resemble the features of Jesus, was still there in my own time, so that I saw it with my own eyes when I resided in the city. It's not at all surprising that Gentiles who long ago received such benefits from our Saviour should have expressed their gratitude thus. For the features of his apostles, Paul and Peter, and indeed of Christ himself, have been preserved in coloured portraits which I have examined. How could it be otherwise when the ancients habitually followed their own Gentile custom of honouring them as saviours in this uninhibited way? Now it's interesting because Eusebius wasn't comfortable with the idea of images, but he quotes this in his History of the Church in the 3rd century. So the idea of these images and these legends going so far back, and the features of Jesus that we've come to know point to quite hard evidence. So of course now we have these various interpretations, you could say, but recognizable as the face of Christ. Contemporary Greek, Macedonian, both these Macedonian, from different periods. These are contemporary. This one is, both these are 16th century. But the unmistakable feature, if you saw it, you know exactly who it is. There we go. And of course, this particularly beautiful mosaic from Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, Istanbul, which seems to bring together those simple features of the icon which you will find in most icons, and which, thanks be to God, has been preserved over the centuries, but has a particular draw, a particular beauty about it. Of course, this all came to a bitter challenge in the 8th century when the Byzantine Emperor Leo decided that they must do away with images. There were books, tomes have been written as to why he came to this conclusion, and he did it off his own bat. Byzantium was threatened by the Islamic invasions and the growth of Islam in the Eastern Mediterranean. He was very afraid that, and the empire had been threatened already. Islam was very direct, no images, straightforward, as he saw it, no nonsense. And large portion of the populace were monks, and their job was painting icons. So it'd be better if we didn't have icons and the monks went to the army to defend the city. So put all those reasons together, and he banned the image, and they went around destroying images in churches and everywhere. It was a huge thing. People were martyred. Iconographers had their hands cut off and their eyes put out, and all sorts of dreadful things, as we can see here from this manuscript. Iconoclasm, that's where it comes from, yeah. So the result of this was the 7th Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. So up until then, as I've said, the image was reflecting what the church felt and thought about who Jesus is. So in the 4th century, in 325, because of controversy over who Jesus was, the church called a council. So the main centres, if we go back to our map, the main centres of the Eastern Mediterranean, where the church had settled. So you had Alexandria was one of the main centres. You had Antioch and Constantinople and Rome. They all got together and they called a council, an ecumenical council. So the first one was in 325, and that established the relationship between Jesus and God the Father, that they were of the same substance. That was the idea. And then the next one was the Council of Nicaea, which put together the Nicene Creed, which most Orthodox Christians still use to this day. Then you had the Council of Ephesus in 381, because the humanity of Jesus was questioned. God could not take human form, but then, or not become human in that sense, be a person. So the role of the Virgin Mary was accentuated, and suddenly her image and her role in the Christian story was extended and accentuated. So in icons, we see more icons of the Virgin Mary, like that one in St. Catherine's Monastery, and we'll see here, sorry about that, in this little icon, which is in the British Museum, which celebrates what they call the Triumph of Orthodoxy. So the church got together again in Nicaea, where the creed had been formed, in the 8th century, and they had to hammer out this whole idea of why the emperor had banned images. And his son and his son's son. So for about 200 years, this controversy continued. And the result was that the church decided, no, this is a Christological question. It's not about images. The question is about who Jesus is. If we say that he became a person, then we can depict him. And we have to depict him, because this stands for the very revelation of God in Christ. So the iconoclasts, they argued that you can't depict the humanity. If you depict the humanity, you're leaving out the divinity. But they went back again to the fathers of the church and said, he is human and divine. He's completely human and he's completely divine, but without confusion. And therefore, an icon of Christ shows the person of Christ. The same way as a photograph of a loved one shows the picture of the loved one, but not the loved one's spirit. But you couldn't have the photograph if that person never had a spirit. So the icon stands as a dogmatic statement of the incarnation, that God became a human person. And that the icon is put together with the scriptures, so that the icon of Jesus is a statement. That's why we say we write icons. It is a text witnessing to the humanity of the Son of God, the second person of the Blessed Trinity. So the scriptures and the icon became one and the same, because they're both saying the same thing. So that was the seventh ecumenical of Nicaea. And it's interesting that the church, East and West, has never had an ecumenical council since this time. And that icon we saw there is called the Triumph of Orthodoxy, which in the Greek and Russian churches is celebrated on the first Sunday of Lent, their Lent, because it's a slightly different calendar. So there we see the emperor, the little emperor, and his mother Irene, who was standing as his regent, that's the word, and the council fathers, and these two down here holding the various icons. And still, if you go to the Greek church or the Russian church on first Sunday of Lent, they bring out all the icons and they go for processions around the streets. So, of course, this is, again, the dogmatic statement. Up on the top, we see M.R. Theos, Mater Theos, Mother of God. So Mary becomes the Mother of God because she gave birth to the Son of God, Jesus Christ. She gives him his humanity. So she plays a special role. She's that bridge. She shows the way to her Son with her hand, who is he who is. Who did they say the Son of Man is? He who is. The one who leads the way. Hodigitria, and of course the angels in attendance. Again, it's not about making a photographic image. It's about a style that was preserved, which best presented what the church was saying. And we'll go a little bit even deeper into that. Jesus, he who is Pantokratora, he who holds all things in his hands. So that's how, and then of course St. John of Damascus was one of the big lights at the council, and then he wrote how matter and divinity are joined in Christ, so that I do not worship matter, but I worship God through matter, which is how my salvation came about. So he was one of the big leading lights, St. John of Damascus, and wrote extensively on that. Now, another very interesting thing which we spoke about earlier, the likeness. Right from very early on, and this particular portrait here was found under the streets of Rome. I think it was about in the last 10 years they discovered it. And it dates from the 3rd century. Now we can see this bald pate, pointed beard. Right throughout the centuries, from a Russian icon to contemporary icons, Paul always has the same countenance. It's been perpetuated and passed on. Same with Peter. This is a portrait of Peter, which is same period, 6th century, as that icon of Christ in St. Catherine, and painted in encaustic, and we'll see portraits of Peter going right down through the centuries, faithfully following. Now, this is what the icon is. At the council fathers were emphatic that what had been laid down prior to the council visually is a set visual language, the same way as the written language of the scriptures. So the icon is perpetuated, almost copied, but you know what, it's nothing copied is ever exactly the same. And as you can see here, there's differences in the way these features are rendered, but still with that icon feel. I'm going to skip a few things because time is marching on. This shows the Egyptian style of iconography, which comes, this is a 5th century icon, and how, because of the Islamic invasions, they were cut off quite a bit from the rest of the church, and the Church of Alexandria became quite out on a limb. But a modern iconographer, Isaac Fanus, in the last century, who studied under some Russian emigres in Paris, took all the elements of the old icons and pharaonic art, the art from the pharaoh, put it together, and he came up with a new style and a new way, which shows that these as icons are recognizable. They have the same quality as icons, but they have a different feel and an almost contemporary feel. Ethiopia, which was influenced by the Church of Alexandria and maintained, produced its own particular style and way of depicting. But as we can see, still keeping to the themes and to the style and to the frontality, etc., of the Byzantine school and the discipline of iconography, the canon. And this is Russia. That just shows you that during the communist regime, how much was destroyed. And interestingly enough, replaced. So instead of going on processions with large icons of Christ through the streets, it was Lenin and it was Stalin, all those guys. Yeah. And this particular icon, which is very beautiful, painted by Andrei Rublev, who was put up, who's been canonized by the Russian Church, and he produced these beautiful, very deeply spiritual, typical Russian. Russia embraced Eastern-style Christianity in the 9th century, and they took Byzantine-style Christianity and gave it their own particular depth of spirit and style, even in their spiritual writings, the saints they produced, etc. And this one was found, thankfully, in a barn. Somebody recognized, they knew that there were some Rublev icons in this period before the revolution, and they went hunting. And it was in a barn, and it was used as a step. And by accident, he stood on it, and it turned over, and he saw. And of course, it was restored. These two as well, St. Paul, again, recognizable, and the Archangel Michael, Rublev icons. Now, these are what we'd call on a desis tier, so they're not looking directly at us. They would have an icon of Christ in the middle, and then the Virgin Mary, John the Baptist, Peter and Paul, Michael and Gabriel, etc., going down, asking for Christ's intercession. So that's why they would be turned towards him. And of course, that icon we saw of the Trinity was one of the famous icons of Andrei Rublev. We don't have time and space to really go into this particular one. It's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's got a geometric design. The figures fit into a perfect circle, which gives it that the idea of eternity. It goes very deep. I'm very tempted. The mountain of Sinai, the tree of the Garden of Eden, the Temple of Jerusalem, the Mount of Transfiguration, the tree of the cross, the New Jerusalem, all symbols, and we didn't go down there. So the creation of an icon is quite complicated. It takes a lot of work. It's a mixture, first of all, a piece of wood, like that, with linen, muslin, and in rabbit skin glue, the old wood glue, which is heated to a certain temperature, and the cloth is soaked in that, and stretched over the wood, like that. And then a mixture of skin glue and chalk, calcium carbonate, is mixed in to form a paste, and then that is spread over the panel, the cloth that's stuck and already dried, and then has to be rubbed in with the hand so no bubbles form. The drawing, so this is a drawing of a particular icon. With the geometric, we haven't got time, that's another whole branch of iconography, is the whole, what they call sacred geometry, which gives the icon that almost relaxed feel, that stillness, because it is balanced, and is meant to be restful because it's meant to draw into prayer. That's another one, a drawing for an icon. And then what they call bowl. So if you know about gilding, the bowl is put around the background, which will be covered with gold. And there's the gold leaf going on. And the bowl has to be sanded and sanded right down until it's completely smooth like glass because of the gold. Colors are generally, this is a different kind of bowl because you can burnish the gold, or the gold can be flat. There's two types. But there's the gold being put on. This is the bowl here. Egg tempera, so these are pure pigments. So these colors would be used in acrylic paint, oil paint, watercolors, etc., depending on the binder. But in iconography, the binder is egg yolk with water and a little bit of vinegar as a preservative. And the colors are built up in very fine, transparent layers on top of each other. The Russians have a different way of painting to the Greeks, even though it's tempera. Greek iconography is generally painted on a easel. Russian iconography is painted flat because it's very watery colors with long drying times between each layer. So you get a different effect with, so that would be the end result of the icon that's being prepared, as you see there. This is the build-up. So that you get the flat colour at the bottom, and then these would be about 4 or 5 highlights which go on thinly to bring up, and then with the whites getting smaller and smaller around the highlighted areas, bringing those features out. So you can see these illustrate very well this sort of style of brushstrokes. Now that's an old Madonna and Child. This is a contemporary Christ. This is Greek style, and here you can see this sort of transparent technique in this sort of Russian style here. So, of course, as I've showed you before, the interior of a Byzantine or an Orthodox church has a huge screen of icons between the nave and the sanctuary. And the priest enters through these doors to the altar. So it's the idea that the whole church is decorated because you're in the company of heaven at every liturgical service. That the liturgy, the Mass, is our participation in the divine, and that it's not just us, it's the whole company of heaven. It's outside of time and space. And there's always the Virgin Mary and Christ on these sides. Christ in majesty, that's the Desus tier I was telling you about, with the figures looking on and asking his intercession, and the life of Christ on that layer. So right from the Annunciation to the Dormition of Mary. Some of them are more elaborate, even more elaborate. And of course, the mosaics in the back of the church, in all the walls. This is in Palermo. And it's set out in a particular way so that the dome is Christ, the Pantocrator, the one who holds all things in his hands. And there you've got the Virgin Mary. He became man for our sake, the company of heaven. Peter, and that's not Paul. Oh, no, sorry, Paul and Peter. I don't know if you can see them more clearly than me. With their particular look. More domes. So that sense, that idea of beauty is a very important part of the spirituality of iconography. Beauty is touching the divine. Beauty attracts. Beauty leads us to depth. Beauty leads us to God. So that the idea that an icon must be beautiful is very important. Now, in some Eastern European countries, even the outside of the church is decorated. This one is in Yugoslavia. Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah. Serbia. This one, Serbian. Yeah. That one's Russian, and this one is Serbian. So even in Russian churches, the outside is gold domes and very, very beautiful. Again, icons in contemporary spirituality and church. This one